She called me a failure. At her own wedding. In front of 200 people wearing tuxedos and fake smiles. That's the line I keep replaying in my head. My daughter, Kayla, my only child, looked me straight in the eye, raised her champagne glass, and said I'd never been enough. Not enough money. Not enough ambition. Not enough man to save her mother. The crowd laughed, thinking it was some kind of dark humor. But I saw it, the glint in her eyes. It wasn't a joke. It was execution. And I was the corpse she buried under applause. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. For 62 years I've swallowed my pride more times than I can count. Former defense contractor, a man who's built machines that survive the impossible. But nothing prepares you for when your own flesh and blood decides to destroy you for sport. She thought I was just an old man with calloused hands and a modest life. She didn't know about the promises I made to her mother, or the fortune I kept hidden behind a lifetime of humility. She didn't know that the house she bragged about, her husband's family estate, was mine all along. And that night, as she humiliated me beside the floral arch and string quartet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: calm. Ice cold, perfect calm. The kind that soldiers feel before pulling the final trigger. When she laughed, I smiled. Because that's when it hit me, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment to keep my last promise to Lauren. She thought the toast was over. But the real speech hadn't even begun. After that night, people thought I disappeared. Truth is, I just went quiet, and in America, quiet men are the ones you should really be afraid of. I drove back home in my old Ford, the same one Kayla used to beg me to hide whenever her friends came over. I parked it in the dark, sat there with the engine ticking, and stared at the front porch light flickering like an old heartbeat. That's when I pulled out Lauren's phone. The one I hadn't touched since the hospital. It was still in her nightstand drawer, wrapped in a silk scarf that smelled faintly of her perfume. There were hundreds of unread messages, photos, voicemails, little pieces of a life that ended too soon. And there it was, at the top of the list, a voice memo, dated 2 days before she died. I pressed play. Her voice came through, fragile but steady. If you're hearing this, Justin, promise me you'll raise her strong. Don't let money make her weak. Teach her to earn it. Teach her to love truth more than comfort. My throat burned. I'd kept that promise for 20 years. Worked in silence, invested smart, built a quiet empire under everyone's noses. But that night, hearing my daughter spit on her mother's memory, it wasn't anger I felt. It was betrayal. And betrayal, my friend, deserves a proper response. So I poured myself a drink, opened my laptop, and logged into an account no one knew existed. My company, the one everyone assumed had gone bankrupt a decade ago, was still alive. Still thriving. And still under my name. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning justice. Cold, precise, and public. The next day, I ordered the invitation list from the wedding planner. Every guest, every journalist, every corporate parasite who'd watched me fall that night. Because if Kayla wanted an audience, I was about to give her one she'd never forget. She played me in front of a crowd. Now it's my turn to set the stage. 3 weeks later, their photos hit every social feed, Kayla and Gavin, smiling in Tuscany, drinking wine like royalty. The caption read, "New beginnings, new legacy." Cute. I almost believed it myself. That morning, I slipped on my work boots, poured black coffee into my travel mug, and smiled at the irony. They were honeymooning in a house I owned, a business funded with my money, and a last name that didn't mean a damn thing without my signature on a few pieces of paper. I made a few calls, quiet ones. Old colleagues from my contracting days, men who owed me favors. Lawyers who preferred cash in envelopes, not wire transfers. By sunset, my daughter's perfect life had a hairline crack in it. The first strike wasn't loud. It never is. Her husband's family investment firm suddenly faced a compliance review. Their accounts were frozen, routine procedure, of course. Gavin's father panicked. Kayla posted a cryptic story about jealous people trying to bring them down. I almost laughed. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs timing. That evening, I took out Lauren's phone again and scrolled through photos of Kayla as a kid, her in the backyard, holding a model rocket I'd helped her build. She looked proud, honest, human. Somewhere along the way, she'd traded wonder for status. I poured another glass of bourbon and whispered, "You wanted to play high society? Let's see how high you can stand when the floor disappears." The next morning, Gavin called me. For the first time in his life, he sounded polite. Said they were having temporary issues and might need a small loan to smooth things over. I told him I'd think about it. He had no idea the man he was asking for help was the one pulling the rug. He thought it was a setback. I knew it was just the opening act. For a while, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Kayla called one evening, her voice thin and shaky. She said everything was fine, but I could hear the panic in her breathing, the kind you can't hide from a father. I wanted to say, "You did this." But instead, I just listened. "I guess you were right," she muttered. "People only care when you've got money." Funny, coming from the girl who once said I wasn't enough because I didn't show mine. I stayed silent, letting her fill the air with excuses. When she hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone like it might ring again. It didn't. That night, the house felt too big. Too quiet. Every sound, the fridge humming, the clock ticking, reminded me of the years I'd spent building walls instead of bridges. Revenge has a way of making you feel powerful. But it also leaves you standing in the dark with your own echo. I went to the garage and opened an old box marked Lauren. Inside were letters, photos, and her favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird. On the first page, she'd underlined a line in pencil, "The one thing that doesn't abide by majority rule is a person's conscience." I sat down right there on the concrete floor and laughed, a tired, bitter laugh. Lauren always knew the storm inside me better than I did. Was I honoring her memory, or twisting it into a weapon? For the first time since that wedding, I hesitated. I poured the bourbon out into the sink, watched it swirl away like the years I couldn't get back. Then I looked at my reflection in the window, older, harder, unrecognizable. "You started this," I told him. "Now finish it." Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's pressure, waiting to break. Revenge never moves in a straight line. The moment you think you're in control, life throws a punch. It came on a Thursday morning, one of those gray, cold ones where the air smells like rain and regret. My lawyer called first. "Justin, small issue," he said. "Your daughter's husband is filing an injunction against your company. Claims you interfered with their assets." I almost smiled. Gavin wasn't stupid after all, just late to the game. By noon, my name was trending in local business circles. "Bitter ex-contractor sabotages son-in-law's firm," the headlines read. Kayla reposted one with a caption, "Family should build, not destroy." She knew exactly what she was doing, making me the villain she could cry about on camera. That evening, my mailbox overflowed with letters, all from people who'd once begged for my signature. Now they wanted distance. That's when I realized the real war had started. Not about money, but about image. And in America, reputation is currency. So I played along. I showed up at Gavin's fancy networking gala, uninvited but smiling. The room froze when I walked in, the forgotten father, the scandal in a suit. Kayla's face drained of color. "Dad, this isn't the time," she hissed. I leaned closer. "Sweetheart," I said quietly, "you made it my time the moment you put my name in your speech." Before anyone could react, I walked up to the stage, handed the microphone to the host, and thanked him for inviting me. "You've all heard the rumors," I said. "So let's make sure you hear the truth, directly from me." The crowd leaned in. Gavin looked like he'd swallowed glass. And that's when I dropped the first piece of real evidence, a file of his family's tax fraud, dated and verified. I didn't say a word after that. Just walked off stage and left them choking on silence. They wanted a public show. I just changed the script. The fallout hit faster than I expected. By the next morning, Gavin's company stock nosedived, and half their investors vanished before lunch. The whispers spread like wildfire: insider trading, hidden debt, family fraud. Nobody knew what was true, but in this country, truth doesn't matter once the rumor catches fire. I watched it unfold from my porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. No victory champagne, no celebration. Just quiet satisfaction, the kind that tastes like justice, not joy. Kayla called that evening, her voice breaking between sobs and rage. "You ruined us," she screamed. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I let her words wash over me. "No," I said softly. "It makes me a man who finally stopped being your fool." She hung up, of course, but not before saying something that cut deep. "Mom would have hated you for this. That one hit where it hurt." I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, Lauren's phone in my hands again. Her voice echoed in my head. "Promise me, Justin, teach her truth over comfort." I'd kept that promise, just not the way she meant. 2 days later, a journalist showed up at my gate. Young guy, full of caffeine and ambition. "Mr. Reeve," he said, "is it true you orchestrated the exposure of your son-in-law's firm?" I looked at him for a long second, then smiled. "Son, I didn't expose them. I just opened the curtains." The article went viral. Every talk show, every blog, every news clip replayed my quote like it was scripture. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the man who brought down the corrupt elite. A folk hero with wrinkles. But fame has its own price. People love a redemption story, until they need a new one. They fell fast. But gravity's fair, it pulls everyone down, eventually. For the first time in months, the phone stopped ringing. Reporters moved on. The world found new scandals to chew on. The storm had passed, or so it seemed. I spent my mornings fixing things around the house, small repairs that didn't matter to anyone but me. The fence, the porch steps, the roof, all the quiet chores that used to remind me of simpler times. I even caught myself humming while tightening a screw. That's how I knew something was wrong. Peace doesn't hum. It whispers before it hits you again. Late one night, I got a letter, actual paper, no return address. The handwriting was sharp, almost angry. Inside was a single photo. Kayla, sitting alone on a park bench, mascara running down her face, holding a foreclosure notice. On the back, just 3 words, "Are you proud?" I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring at the glow of the streetlights on wet pavement, wondering if I'd crossed that invisible line between justice and cruelty. Lauren would have told me to stop. She believed in mercy, even for the ungrateful. But mercy never taught anyone a lesson. Pain did. The next morning, I drove to the old family house, the one Kayla thought belonged to Gavin's family. It stood there, perfect as ever, white columns shining like false promises. The gate creaked open when I pushed it, and for a moment, I almost felt her presence, the daughter I used to tuck in, not the woman who sold her soul for a headline. Inside, I found a box of her childhood drawings still in the attic. Crayons, stick figures, stars, and "Daddy" written in crooked letters. My chest tightened. Was I avenging the man I used to be, or punishing the father I'd become? I put the drawings back, shut the box, and locked the door behind me. The quiet before justice feels a lot like guilt. I thought the story had reached its end. The guilty exposed, the pride shattered, the lesson delivered. But truth has a way of digging deeper, even when you think the grave's already filled. It started with a call from my old accountant, Phil. Good man. Loyal. Nervous as hell. "Justin," he said, "you need to see this. It's about Lauren's fund." Her fund. The cancer research trust I'd built in her name, the one meant to help families who couldn't afford treatment. I drove to his office that same afternoon, rain tapping against the windshield like a warning. Phil slid a folder across the desk. "Your daughter's husband," he said, voice low. "He moved money out of the foundation. 200,000. Shell accounts. It's bad." I froze. Of all the lines Gavin could have crossed, this was the one painted in blood. That fund wasn't business. It was sacred. Lauren's memory lived in every check we wrote, every child we helped. And he used it to buy himself another car. That was the moment something shifted inside me. The revenge stopped being about pride or payback. It became a duty. A promise renewed. I wasn't just settling scores anymore. I was cleaning house. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the rain. "Phil," I said quietly, "I need every record, every transaction. And I need them by tonight." He nodded, no questions asked. When I got home, I opened Lauren's phone again, playing that last voicemail. Her voice, soft but certain, truth over comfort. I'd failed that once. Not again. I turned on my computer, opened a new file, and began writing names, dates, amounts. By midnight, I knew exactly how to burn their world to the ground without lighting a single match. I thought the game was over. Turns out, I was just switching weapons. They say karma comes in its own time. In my case, it came with a press release and a lawyer's grin. A week after I opened the curtains, the world flipped. Gavin's team hired a crisis PR shop. They were good, real Hollywood-level spin. Overnight, the story changed. Reclusive contractor accused of misusing Lauren's foundation funds. The headline read like a punch. My phone lit up with calls. Reporters. Former friends. Voices I hadn't heard since college. Nobody asked if it was true. They wanted a quote. They wanted blood. Kayla went on camera. Her face was the same as on the wedding video. Flawless, rehearsed. My father, she said, voice steady, took advantage of Mom's name. He hid money. He lied to me. Clips of our lives were stitched together like a cheap movie. My laugh lines turned into evidence of a monster. Then the lawyers moved. Temporary restraining orders. An emergency audit. Banks froze accounts. The foundation's donors, frightened and prone to headlines, pulled their checks. The children we helped got letters that said funding was suspended pending review. I watched one envelope tremble in my hand like a guilty confession. Phil called, voice small. "There's irregularities," he stammered. "I found transfers I don't recognize." The man who'd balanced my books for 30 years sounded like he'd been replaced by a stranger. I asked him to come by. He said he couldn't. 2 hours later, there was a voicemail, there at my door. Social media did the rest. My face was on feeds next to angry emojis. Neighbors whispered. A local pastor texted to say he was praying for clarity. The house I'd kept for Lauren started getting strangers knocking, not friends, just people who wanted to see the man from the news. Everything I'd built, the quiet accounts, the charity, the house, even the memory of Lauren, felt like it was being peeled off me. And the worst part, the proof I'd collected, the files, the records, suddenly looked like a man trying to cover his tracks. I sat at my kitchen table, the light over the sink swinging with the same rhythm as my heart. I played Lauren's voicemail again. Her voice trembled on the line. "Keep her honest, Justin. Don't let money make monsters." I had tried. I had failed. That night, a camera flashed outside my gate. A reporter's face in the window. My name trended with hashtags I didn't want to own. Kayla's words echoed. "My father took from the foundation. My foundation. My life's work." I stared at the phone. It buzzed with a single message. "We filed for emergency seizure. Be prepared." And then there was a knock at the door. I opened the door to 3 uniformed officers and a camera crew. I closed it on them. That was my first good decision of the week. For 2 days I lived inside a slow-motion collapse. Then something small shifted. A volunteer from the foundation called. Quiet voice. "Mr. Reeve, the clinic in Akron called. They haven't received their grant." She sounded 10 years older than her age. Fear does that. It adds years overnight. You know what hit me? It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't Kayla on TV. It was a single cancelled appointment. A child's chemo delayed. A mother with a list and nowhere to turn. Suddenly the story stopped being about pride. It became about harm. I sat at the kitchen table and opened Lauren's book again. The penciled line she circled still stared up at me. A person's conscience. I touched the words like they were the last thing I owned. I'd started this to honor her. Somewhere along the way, I let headlines rewrite the play. Phil called that afternoon. His voice was raw. "They forced me, Justin. They took my hard drive. They said if I talk." He didn't finish. I knew what he meant. "Where?" I asked. "At the back office. 2 miles from your old plant." His voice trembled. "There's a ledger. Handwritten. I hid a copy." He swallowed. "I can meet." Tonight. I could have raged. I could have burned down every mansion that bore their name. But rage is loud and sloppy. It breaks things you need. Instead, I made a list. Short. Surgical. Names. Dates. Transfers. Beneficiaries who suddenly stopped getting checks. I wrote them down with the same careful penmanship I used when I signed off on blueprints that would keep soldiers alive. Precision matters. That night, I put on my old jacket and drove to the back office Phil named. Rain slicked the road. My headlights cut a path through the dark. I kept Lauren's iPhone in my pocket. Her last voicemail played in my head like a metronome. Truth over comfort. I met Phil under a flickering street lamp. He handed me an envelope. Inside, a single printout. It was messy. Handwritten numbers. Bank codes. A name. My stomach dropped. Not because it was incriminating. Because it was salvageable. We can fix this, he said. Not by revenge. By proof. By putting the story back where it belongs, around the people hurt, not the people who cheapen them for headlines. I nodded. I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness. Clarity. The kind of cold, clean resolution that comes from knowing your aim. We planned slow. We planned public. We planned honest. And then Phil whispered one thing that made my hand go ice cold. There's someone else who knows. Someone closer than you think. I looked at him. He looked at me. Rain hit the hood like a drum. I realized the war wasn't only about exposing them. It was about rebuilding what they'd torn apart. I know, I said. And I'm going to put it back. Revenge isn't always an arrow. Sometimes it's a bridge. We didn't go viral by accident. We engineered it. Phil and I sat in a diner that smelled like burned coffee and ambition. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, bank slips, wire trails, and a ledger in a shaky hand, the fingerprints of the people who'd siphoned Lauren's fund. I felt the paper like a trigger. We called an old friend, Maria Torres, an investigative reporter who still cared about stories that hurt for the right reasons. She met us under the false light of a newsroom, eyes tired but sharp. If this checks out, she said, we don't leak. We build it. We make them answer in public. I wrote a short statement. No flourishes. No chest beating. My name is Justin Reeve. I'm here to fix what was broken. It felt strange to introduce myself that way. Almost humble. Almost true. The next morning, we set the stage at the clinic in Akron, the one that had gone without a check. Patients sat in plastic chairs. Nurses clutched clipboards. A camera crew taped the faded sign outside. We wanted faces. We wanted the people who'd been hurt to be the first thing the world saw. Maria spoke, measured and fierce. She laid out the paper trail. She named the shell accounts. She showed a bank transfer timed the same week Gavin donated to a charity that now had no trace. The room went quiet. The feed hit tens of thousands within the hour. Then I asked, quietly, if I could say one thing. The producer hesitated, then nodded. I held up Lauren's iPhone like a relic. This is her voice, I said. She left it to remind me why we do this. I pressed play. For 20 seconds, Lauren's words filled a space that had been full of lies. Her voice was soft, precise. Teach her truth over comfort, she said. It was less spectacle than a verdict. People wept. A donor unfurled his hand and put money back into the clinic's box. A mother whispered, "Thank you," into my ear. Cameras panned to Kayla's house where a neighbor watched the live stream and texted, "Did you see this?" By dusk, hashtags trended. By midnight, Gavin's name had been scrubbed from 3 boards. Kayla went on defense, posting tearful clips about family betrayal. But the narrative had shifted. The victims were visible again. The ledger had a face. The fund had a pulse. I sat on my porch and watched the glow of the phone like a second dawn. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift. Not because I'd won. Because the truth had legs now. But truth is a stubborn animal. It can run and it can bite back. Tonight, I planned to pull the teeth. He thought this was over. He was wrong. Morning came with headlines again, only this time, they carried my name with a different tone. Veteran contractor exposes charity fraud, father turns tables on high society scam. The tide had shifted. The truth was finally louder than the lies. But victories don't come clean. They drag mud behind them. Kayla showed up at my door that evening. No makeup, no cameras, no audience, just a trembling figure in a raincoat. Her eyes were red, voice brittle. They left me, Dad. Gavin's gone. The accounts are frozen. I can't even pay rent. I studied her, the same way I used to study blueprints, tracing the cracks, searching for where the pressure would give. You chose him over us, I said. She shook her head. No, I chose the life I thought Mom wanted for me. Her voice cracked on the word Mom. That's when I knew the fight was over. She wasn't a villain anymore. Just a lost child trying to make sense of a broken map. I invited her inside. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you do it? Why destroy everything?" I looked at her, then at Lauren's phone on the table. I didn't destroy it, Kayla. I uncovered it. There's a difference. She stared at the phone like it might bite. That message was real. I nodded. Your mother's voice. I never stopped listening to it. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. And for the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to run barefoot through the yard, chasing fireflies. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but lies were what got us here. Instead, I handed her a folded check. For the clinic, I said. Not for you. For them. Make it right. She took it, tears streaking her face, then whispered, "What do I do now?" I smiled faintly. Start by earning back your own name. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Justice had been served, but forgiveness, that was the real battlefield waiting ahead. Revenge ends when truth speaks. Redemption starts when you listen. By morning, the storm had moved inland. News vans were gone, and the driveway was slick with rain. Kayla sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug that had seen more wars than she had years. She looked small again. Human. I went to the clinic, she said quietly. They remembered Mom. They thanked me. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the window. They should. You're fixing what you broke. She flinched. The truth still stung, but it needed to. Scars don't form from soft touches. Meanwhile, the fallout kept spreading. Gavin's father was indicted, his family's empire crumbling faster than the news cycle could cover it. The mansion, the cars, the legacy, all of it repossessed, auctioned off, stripped clean. Justice by paperwork. I was asked to give a statement again, this time by the same outlets that once called me a con artist. Do you have anything you'd like to say to your daughter? One reporter shouted outside my gate. I paused before answering. Yes, I said. She's learning what real wealth looks like. That line made every headline by noon. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. The sky was pale, the kind of color that makes you forget what season it is. I cleaned the headstone, replaced the wilted flowers, and set Lauren's iPhone on the marble for a moment. We did it, Lo, I whispered. We kept the promise. Kayla joined me there not long after. No designer coat. No cameras. Just rain on her shoulders and silence between us. She knelt beside me, tracing her mother's name with her fingers. She'd hate what I became, she said. I shook my head. No. She'd hate that it took this long for you to see it. For a long time, we said nothing. Just the wind, the rain, and the faint hum of distant thunder, like the world was taking a deep breath. When we finally stood, Kayla reached for the phone. Can I hear it? She asked. I hesitated, then nodded. She pressed play. Lauren's voice filled the air, soft and timeless. Truth over comfort, my love. Kayla cried, the kind that breaks something inside, but leaves room for light to come in. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who betrayed me. I saw the daughter I'd been fighting for all along. Sometimes justice restores more than it destroys. 2 weeks later, the city held a charity gala, the same event where Kayla once toasted my failure. Different year. Different script. They invited me to speak, though no one expected I'd accept. But I did. Not for applause, for closure. When I arrived, the air was heavy with perfume and hypocrisy. Flashbulbs popped, journalists whispered, and the same people who once crossed the street to avoid me now smiled like old friends. Funny how truth rearranges loyalties. Kayla stood near the stage, wearing a simple black dress. No diamonds, no pretense. When she caught my eye, she didn't smile. She nodded, small, but real. The host introduced me, a man whose integrity restored faith in what philanthropy truly means. I almost laughed. Integrity? I was just a man who'd been pushed too far and decided to push back. I stepped to the microphone and scanned the room. You know, I said, a year ago, I was called a liar, a thief, a disgrace. Tonight, I'm apparently an example. I'm not sure which version of me is more dangerous. A polite ripple of laughter, the nervous kind. Then I held up Lauren's iPhone. This belonged to my late wife, I said. Her voice reminded me that truth isn't owned. It's lived. I pressed play, and for the third and last time, her message echoed through a room full of polished strangers. Teach her truth over comfort. The sound cut through the air like a sermon. Kayla lowered her head. The crowd went still. Even the cameras stopped clicking. I continued, we built a foundation to honor that truth, and tonight, every cent raised goes back to the clinics that were nearly destroyed by greed. I paused, then glanced toward the press row. Greed that wore designer suits and family crests. A murmur spread, a ripple of recognition. Gavin's family name flashed on the screen behind me, the financial trail displayed for all to see. Public humiliation, round 3. The circle complete. The crowd gasped. Phones went up. History repeated itself, but this time, I was the one holding the mic. I ended simply, some toasts age well. Others just sour in memory. Then I stepped away, leaving silence, sharp, unedited, honest. Kayla followed me outside. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I looked at her, rain beginning to fall again, steady and familiar. Yes, I said. I did. Because truth deserves witnesses. He wanted legacy. I gave him an epitaph. The next morning felt different. No noise. No headlines. Just sunlight breaking through blinds like forgiveness sneaking into the room. Kayla was in the kitchen, brewing coffee, my coffee, the cheap brand she used to mock. It's not bad, she said, forcing a smile. Kinda honest. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. That's what honesty tastes like, bitter, but it wakes you up. The gala had changed everything. Donations poured back in. The foundation doubled overnight, clinics reopened, families wrote letters. One mother said, "Your wife's voice saved my son." I printed that email and pinned it on the fridge. It felt like Lauren was home again. But there was still something unfinished, the moral weight of it all. Revenge had given me closure, sure. But forgiveness? That's a harder project. Kayla and I sat on the porch that afternoon, watching the sky burn gold over the hills. You know, she said, I keep thinking about Mom. What she'd say if she saw all this. I nodded. She'd say we both made a mess. But at least we cleaned it up. Kayla chuckled softly, then grew quiet. Dad, I don't know if I can ever make it right. You don't need to, I said. You just have to stop making it worse. We sat in silence. The kind that doesn't accuse anymore, it just breathes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. One last thing, I said. Inside was a check $1, folded in half. This is your inheritance. The same one I promised you. She looked confused. $1? Yeah, I said. So you'll remember, real worth isn't something I can hand you. She smiled through the tears. That's cruelly poetic. I shrugged. I'm old. It's all I have left, poetry and receipts. The sun dipped lower. The world seemed lighter somehow, like a long exhale after years of holding breath. For the first time, I felt the weight of revenge lift completely. What remained wasn't anger. It was peace, quiet, unassuming, but finally earned. Kayla leaned her head on my shoulder. You ever think Mom planned all this? I looked at the fading light and said, No, sweetheart. She just trusted we'd figure it out. Justice built the bridge. Forgiveness let us cross it. A year later, I woke before dawn. Old habits die hardest. The world was quiet, soft, unarmored. I brewed coffee, stepped onto the porch, and listened to the slow hum of a town that had finally forgotten my name. That was the point. The foundation thrived. Clinics opened in 3 new states. They didn't need my face anymore, just Lauren's name, shining quietly on the plaque. That was all I ever wanted. Kayla moved into a small apartment near the hospital. She teaches now, volunteers with kids whose parents can't afford care. Sometimes she sends photos, her in scrubs, messy ponytail, no filters. The kind of beauty that doesn't need staging. Last week, she mailed me something. A small box. Inside was the iPhone. Lauren's iPhone. A note attached in Kayla's handwriting. I think you've listened long enough. Maybe it's time to speak again. I held it for a long time before turning it on. The screen lit up, but the old recordings were gone. Just one new message waited, a voice memo from Kayla. Her tone was calm, steady, familiar in ways I didn't expect. Dad, I found her old drafts, her letters to you. She never doubted you. Not once. Thank you for keeping her promise better than either of us deserved. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just sat there, letting the morning light spill across the porch. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by Lauren's voice. I was guided by it. When the clock struck 8, I drove to the clinic's new wing. A nurse greeted me at the door and pointed to a brass plaque above the entrance, the Reeves Center for Truth and Care, founded in memory of Lauren and guided by her voice. I traced the words with my fingers, feeling something unclench inside. Not victory. Not revenge. Just release. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass. Older, worn, but lighter. I smiled. You were right, Lo, I whispered. Truth over comfort. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint chime of the entrance bell, soft, endless, like her laughter. I walked away without looking back. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.